Mack McWilliams is the second UCF Knight off the board in the NFL draft, but are the Eagles a good fit for his talent?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Guys, it's that time. The NFL draft is over. UCF had two guys drafted. Our guy, RJ Harvey, who we talked about in an earlier segment, and now Mack McWilliams with the 145th pick in the fifth round. The Philadelphia Eagles selected Mack McWilliams, cornerback from UCF. Look, there weren't a ton of guys drafted on the squad, but certainly we're very proud that Mack McWilliams was able to make the list. Andrew, we'll talk about Mack and then what these draft results mean, but let's start with Mack. What did you think about him going in the fifth round of the NFL draft?
I thought this was, he was a day three guy easily. I thought, fifth to seventh round. If you looked at a combination of the combine plus a lot of the draft analysis based on a lot of his physical measurements and all that other stuff, he was easily the second best guy on this team as far as NFL ready, hitting those, those marks that they're looking for. It's great that teams saw the value in him. I think Philadelphia, can use him. Fifth round, good spot for him. When you break down the different rounds, we talked about RJ Harvey, first couple rounds, there's an expectation to set in and start or very close to it, play meaningful time. You get to them, the day three guys and, the fourth through seventh round. It's not quite like that. It offers opportunity to find playing time, but not with the extreme expectation of must deliver quickly. So, a guy Mack McWilliams who, has a long college career. He spent 4 years at UAB and then 1 year at UCF, so he's got a lot of experience time, but it allows him to work up the speed of the NFL without the general expectation that he's going to have to start very quickly. And we'll talk about the initial depth chart. Our lads already has an updated estimated depth chart, and McWilliams is already on it. So, I think before we get out, we need to really talk about where he fits on that team and the expectation. But just to kind of finish the first part of this, I do want to highlight that he did well at UCF. He may not have been the most well-known name. BJ Adams was definitely a much more well-known, defensive back for UCF, but it's a sum of the parts. You look at the physical attributes, and McWilliams, was, he's 5'10", not the tallest guy, but good enough. 191, so he has a little bit of size, and a 34-inch vertical jump, which really, helps make up for that size. So, he could still play defense despite being, more of a the shorter half of the typical defensive back size. A 4'4", 140, that's not bad. Obviously there are players out there that are better, and that's why they got drafted higher. But for a fifth rounder, that's not bad. So he has decent speed, has an eye for the ball, good at run defense, which, he knows how to tackle, and defensive backs, there's a lot out there that just don't tackle well, and that's not his problem. So I think Philadelphia has a good prospect on their hands. They're going to work with him. They obviously, it's not a vacuum. You guys can improve. They can work on stuff, or they can find ways to not allow their weaknesses to be over accentuated. So they're going to work with Mack and on some of his other, attributes, maybe a little bit of his agility and just the eye for the ball and the passing routes, and work towards getting him on the field. He's already in that depth chart, and I think he's in a good spot.
Yeah, I think he's in a good too. I do want to note for our listeners that there were 15 corners taken before Mack McWilliams. I'm sorry. But there was only there were only two other corners from the Big 12 that actually got drafted. We got Jacob Parrish, who went from Kansas State. And we have Corey Black from Oklahoma State. Those are the only other Big 12 corners that got drafted. So he was in a small group from the conference that actually made it into the NFL draft. The rest of the corners, it was very SEC and Big Ten heavy in this draft. Now, the SEC had something ridiculous like 79 players drafted. I think that was a record of some sort. But certainly, I think this is a steal here for the Eagles in the 5th round. Now, in a previous segment, when we talked about RJ Harvey, we talked about 1st and 2nd round expectations. If you're taking in those rounds, there's an expectation that you will be a starter or a significant contributor by year 2 of your career. But for 5th rounders, sometimes it's a struggle whether they're going to make a roster. As you just mentioned, in the updated roster, they already have him on the depth chart. I think that's a win if you're Mack McWilliams, because certainly a lot of your peers in the 5th round are going to be struggling to make the 53-man roster.
Absolutely. That's why the rosters are expanded early on. You've got your undrafted free agents and your minicamp invitees that are fighting for those spots. Being a draftee does not guarantee you that you're going to make the roster. It definitely gives you a leg up because there's there's more dollars on the line. There's more skin in the game for the teams. So, you go based on that salary structure. And so, an undrafted free agent may make $300,000. A drafted rookie gets a 4-year contract for multiple millions of dollars total. So there's more skin there. And if they get cut, that's dead money against the cap. So teams are going to look harder at their draft picks versus their undrafted free agents. That doesn't mean the undrafted guys can't make the team, but it definitely gives a leg up for Mack McWilliams. And you look at the Our Lads depth chart, and they already updated it real quickly after the draft. They've got McWilliams as their second nickelback. They have him behind Cooper DeJean, and obviously Cooper had a great year last year as a 2nd round rookie, like we were just talked about, 2nd rounder, expectation to get on the field. He did well. He's got that spot locked in, but you're the second guy. There are times where got shaken up, maybe needed a couple plays off or whatever. That's where that second guy needs to come in and be Johnny on the spot. Sometimes it's harder to be a backup than a starter. Because of that, you've got to be ready to go at a moment's notice, and you just got to stand on the sideline until that situation comes up. So if McWilliams can maintain that second nickel spot, he will see the field. And you may be able to get in on special teams as well, which is always a plus. Again, we're going to start with the rookie mini camps and all that stuff, and the draftees are usually a part of that, and he's going to get a chance to get to know his teammates, get to know the system, and kind of work his way in. But just the fact that the expectation is on, and Our Lads, when it comes to the depth charts, especially at this time of year, is pretty good. They have a pretty good idea. Like they already have RJ Harvey as RB1 on that team because they lost Javonte Williams, and the next guy is the next guy is Jaleel McLaughlin, who's not an RB1, and he may lose his job because he's too similar in style to Harvey. So they've already created the expectation about RJ Harvey being heavily involved in the offense. And it kind of corroborates with stuff that Sean Payton has said. So seeing Mack McWilliams as the second string on the nickelback position, on Our Lads, I take that seriously. I think it's credible. And that gives him the opportunity to work behind a very talented player like Cooper and work on getting better. Because at the end of the day, the guys who've been there, part of what they do is help make the guys behind them better, because if something, Lord knows, something could happen, and bench players got to come in. The last thing you want is to be relying on a bench player who's not prepared to play.
Yeah, look, I love Mack to the Eagles. I think UCF fans love it too. Draft results matter, I think, in terms of the perception of the program, and whether you're putting guys in the league matter, but how much does it matter? We'll talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Ever check into your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where our friends at Monarch Money come in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Surprise insights, all in one convenience, and easy collaboration, whether you have multiple accounts or somebody that you need to manage money with. Monarch Money has a solution for you. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. How much do draft results matter in recruiting? Certainly, it does not hurt to be able to say, I am putting guys in the league if you're Scott Frost. I think this is going to be important moving forward for him and McKenzie Milton. They need to put quarterbacks in the league. They need to put offensive guys in the league. They need more RJ Harveys. And team success will have a lot to do with how many guys get drafted. You don't see a ton of draft picks coming from losers from 4-win teams. I think having a second-round draft pick from a 4-win team was an absolute coup for UCF. I mean, we talked about this over and over again. I thought RJ was a first-round talent that might land in the second round. You felt otherwise. He ended up running in the second round. But I understand where you were coming from, Andrew, with this. Look, I think that you need to be able to tout draft results in today's college football. And I think that it would help if Scott Frost could help get some of the guys on next year's team coming out into the NFL draft. Realistically, maybe 3 to 5 guys next year could be a goal for UCF.
Well, let me first say, the results definitely make a difference in your recruiting. If you're putting guys in the league, which is the dream of people who play in college, you don't, this isn't D3 where you do it because you flat out love the game. My dad went to a D3 school. They attract a certain type of player. He went to John Carroll. Their rivals are Mount Union, and Mount Union, one of the best D3 schools ever. But that attracts a different style of player. That's a guy who's willing to pay his own way, or find other financial aid avenues to be able to play football. You go to Division II and then Division I, outside of the Pioneer League, these are players that have a dream to get to the next level. You don't go to UCF and not want to, be good enough to not play in the NFL. Sure, there's going to be exceptions here and there, but for the most part, that's the dream, is you want to get to the league. I mean, it's no different than, in baseball. You want to get to the big, the show. You want to work your way up. So if you can prove to recruits, you come here and we have the tools and the resources, the facilities, the know-how, and the drive to get players like you to the big dance in the NFL, then, that makes it that much more appealing to sign the dotted line. Now, it starts with one. Obviously UCF's have many players drafted over the years, but it starts with one. And the thing that they can utilize with RJ Harvey, because you can use recency bias here. You can't use a guy like Blake Bortles or Shaquille Griffin in this situation. Guys who are from Florida. Blake was from nearby Oviedo, where I lived for a number of years. You can't use that anymore because he's been out of the league too long. RJ Harvey is from Orlando, so you've got that hometown hero mentality. You've got that, he's from the, he's in state, he's from the area. He did his recruiting thing. He went out of state, and then he came back home and became a legend, and has now made it to the NFL as the highest running back drafted in UCF history. And this is a guy that played quarterback at his previous school in Virginia. Obviously he knew how to run, but as far as being an exclusive running back in college, he didn't do that until he came over to UCF. He had a couple carries in 2020. He missed 21 due to injury. He tore his knee apart. And then he was healthy in 22 through 24. The rest is history. So you use that story, the story of the adversity and the fact that, he fell down, he got back up, the school supported him, the fan base supported him, the city supported him. And you know what? He became a legend, 2nd round draft pick. He's going to, do something in the NFL. It's like I said before, you go to one of these other schools, you're just part of history. You come to UCF, you write history. You're creating history as you go, and you become the legend. A player like RJ Harvey, if you went to Florida, he would disappear as far as that legendary status. Because you got like, well, hold on, you got like the Tim Tebow's of the world, and players like that. You got in Florida State, you got the Peter Works and the Charlie Wards. I mean, it's really almost impossible to get to that level. But at UCF, there's opportunity to become a legend, and using the story of RJ Harvey, who has cemented himself as a UCF legend, should entice other players to say, hey, I want that. I want that opportunity. I want to be able to create that kind of success, and I want my name attached to the success of a program. I'm sorry for cutting you off, but
no. You're okay. You're okay. I just wanted to add, though, I do think that, the Blake Bortles and the Shaquille Griffins and those guys are not completely irrelevant if you're trying to say, even when we were in Conference USA, we were able to get guys to the NFL from UCF, right? UCF is a place where you can get to the NFL, and we're in an even better position now. Look what happened to RJ. Like you said, the highest drafted running back in UCF history. Now that we're in the Big 12 and we're playing in a Power 4 conference, and there's even more opportunity here than there ever has been before. Before we close this show, I want to talk about how NIL affects all this. Now, I think NIL is going to keep kids in school longer, Andrew, right? Like, they're going to be in school longer, and that's going to improve, I think, the quality of the college game, especially if you're Scott Frost, right? If you get a guy, you'll have a chance to keep him around, saying, hey, if you're not a 1st or 2nd round draft pick, come back to school. You're going to make a good amount of change. Your family's not going to starve if you return to school. And you get another year to improve your draft stock, but you don't have to worry about giving up all the money you could have made if you went to the NFL. How does NIL affect all this? Should we, with kids staying in school longer, be focused on draft results, or should there be a natural progression of guys to the NFL if you're winning, right? Because winning changes this. I've had this talk across shows today about how winning changes the formula. It changes the equation for you. When you're winning, guys are naturally going to the NFL, or they're going pro a little sooner, and then it's creating opportunity for high-level recruits to just kind of step in, and you create a flow of players, right? But I just think that there's going to be some years where all your guys return, right? Because they're getting paid now in college, and there's no reason to risk it unless you're going to be a 1st or maybe high 2nd round draft pick.
Yeah. What I think is going to happen is you're going to see less underclassmen declare. I'm going to go back in the way back time machine. Jacoby Glenn was a corner who played a decade plus ago and made the choice to go to the NFL early, and it backfired. He should have waited another year, and he ended up fizzling. Nothing really came of it. And people are using Quinn Ewers as a cautionary tale. You can't use him as a good example. And the reason why is his motivations were completely different. He got his big NIL deal at Ohio State. He was there for a year. He went to Texas. He's a Texas boy. Texas has always been where he wanted to be. He was no longer going to be the man at Texas. He could have taken a large I think it was $8 million to go play somewhere else, but he didn't want to play anywhere else. He wanted to play at Texas. So the Texas window was closed. You know what? At that point, screw it. I'm going to the NFL and I'm going to see what happens there. And he lost a lot of money because he got drafted in the 7th round versus an $8 million NIL deal that was presented to him. Money wasn't his motivation. And so it really depends on who the person is. Money is not the motivating factor for I don't want to say lots of players. I don't know a specific number, but we have evidence that money isn't always the driving factor. You know, there's a variety of reasons why someone would choose to stay at a school, leave a school, go to the NFL. And NIL is just a piece of that. Now, money talks, and money has, you know, as Ted DiBiase said, everyone has a price. You know, some people just, you know, you got to hit that number and they'll be like, oh, okay. And they'll jump ship. You know, we saw it with Mustafa Cham. You know, he got, you know, a 2-bagger and he's gone. So in football, it's no different. You know, players have a price. And yeah, schools are going to have to balance all this money, this NIL money, you know, that UCF's doing with the, you know, the Competitive Success Fund to be able to bankroll their programs and be able to sufficiently, you know, compensate these players. That's a different topic for a different day. It's now about what drives these players. And at the end of the day, if it's just to get to the league, you know what? Maybe you still go early. But I think for the most part, it's going to scale back a little bit. You're going to see less underclassmen go outside of the top echelon. You know, if you're going to be a day, back end day 2, day 3 pick, you're not going. You're probably staying for another year, looking to improve your draft stock, develop a little more physically and mentally, and try to do better. There are exceptions again. You know, maybe this is a weak class for that particular position, so you're trying to take advantage of a situation. Now, this was a weak quarterback class. You know, it was really not a good class at all. And the draft results speak for themselves, how they played out. But every year, the position breakdown of who's going and who's not changes. And that also can change the motivation if an underclassman's going to go to the NFL or stick around for an extra year.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to see what guys decide to do. Like I said, team success will have a lot to say in where this conversation lands. But I think UCF fans are looking forward to seeing what Scott Frost can do with it. Andrew Gluchov, thank you for joining me as always. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew. And you catch my work on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
That's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe on the channel. We appreciate that. And for your next listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find them here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.